Imagine this. You're a country with breathtaking landscapes, a culture of art, wine, and soccer, and an economy that's been through more crises than a telenovela heroine. That, my friends, is Argentina. Welcome back to Economic Binoculars, where we take a long, hard stare at the world's most fascinating economies, and this time we're zooming all the way into the land of Messi, Malbec, and monetary meltdowns. In late 2023, Javier Milei, Argentina's self-described anarcho-capitalist, ran for president wielding a chainsaw and a bold promise to slash the bloated Argentine state, kill inflation, and dollarize the economy. Against all odds, he won. But before we get to Milei's economic revolution, let's rewind. How did a once rich nation end up stuck in a loop of hyperinflation, debt defaults, and IMF bailouts? And can Milei really fix it? In this video, we will break down into 3 sections. 1. Introduction of the land of silver and surprises. 2. Economic chaos on loop, 1990s to 2020s. 3. The Milei shock therapy. Argentina is the 8th largest country in the world. Seriously. It stretches across 2.78 million square kilometers, big enough to fit Germany, France, and Spain inside with room for a steakhouse. Population, 2025 estimate, 47.6 million. Capital and largest city, Buenos Aires. GDP, $683.5 billion. GDP per capita, $14,362. Currency, Argentine peso. Well, for now. Unemployment, down to 5.8% from a recent peak of 13% in 2021. Exports, 2024, $90 billion. Imports, 2024, $72 billion. Current account balance, small surplus. Finally, Argentina's economy is deeply rooted in commodities. Agriculture accounts for about 10% of GDP, but it punches above its weight. It's nearly 60% of total exports. Argentina is the world's 3rd largest soybean producer and a top 5 exporter of beef, corn, and wheat. And here's where things get spicy. Lithium. Argentina sits on the lithium triangle with Chile and Bolivia, holding about 20% of the world's lithium reserves. That's a golden ticket in the EV age. Agriculture, approximately 10% of GDP. Industry, 21%. Manufacturing, mining, energy. Services, 69%. Services dominate, especially finance, real estate, and tourism. But productivity has stagnated. Red tape, currency instability, and erratic government policies have made business difficult. Let's rewind to the mid-70s in Argentina. Spoiler alert, it was basically an economic horror movie. The country experienced a toxic mix of massive fiscal deficits, chronic money printing by the central bank, and a ballooning public sector. Military rule throughout the late 70s and early 80s added fuel to the fire with erratic economic policies. And when democracy returned in 1983 under President Raúl Alfonsín, the economy was already in crisis mode. Alfonsín tried to stabilize things with the Austral Plan in 1985, introducing a new currency, the Austral, freezing wages and prices, and tightening monetary policy. But without long-term structural reforms or credible fiscal discipline, inflation came roaring back with a vengeance. Between 1975 and 1990, Argentina experienced one of the most extreme bouts of inflation in modern history. In 1989, as the country spiraled into chaos, it hit hyperinflation, peaking at around 5,000% annually. That is not a typo. Okay, let's make this insane number, 5,000% inflation, a little more real. Imagine this. You walk into a bakery in Buenos Aires on January 1st, 1989, and a loaf of bread costs 1 Austral. But by the end of that same year, that same loaf of bread would cost around 51 Australes. That's 50 times more expensive in just 12 months. Now scale that up across food, clothes, medicine, everything. And here's the kicker. Prices didn't just rise gradually. They sometimes doubled within weeks or even days. Now, imagine living in that chaos. If you got paid on Friday, you would sprint to the store before sundown to spend your entire paycheck. Not because you're a shopaholic, but because by Monday, your money would be worth a lot less. Saving in Australia's useless. People started buying whatever they could: furniture, food, foreign currency, anything that would hold value better than paper money. That's why stores were packed, shelves were empty, and inflation became a self-fulfilling beast. And trust in the banking system? Gone. Poof. As soon as people suspected the currency or banks were in trouble, they'd pull their cash out. Massive bank runs. Banks couldn't operate because no one trusted them to protect savings. People kept money under mattresses or converted it to dollars on the black market. Why? Because tomorrow's Austral could be toilet paper. And just when you think this country couldn't get any worse, well, it had just begun after Alfonsín resigned early and handed power to Carlos Menem, who then rolled out the radical convertibility plan in the early 1990s. The plan is basically said, okay, that's enough. Let's just tie our currency to the US dollar and call it a day. President Carlos Menem pegged the peso to the US dollar at a 1-to-1 rate. Inflation dropped to single digits. Annual inflation, 1993, 7.4%, a miracle by Argentine standards. GDP growth, 1991 to 1997, 6% plus annually. But don't call it a miracle just yet. President Menem's convertibility plan, pegging the peso 1-to-1 with the US dollar, was designed to stabilize the currency and tame inflation. And for a while, it worked. But underneath the surface, cracks were spreading. Argentina didn't fix its fiscal deficit, nor did it address its growing trade deficit. Exports remained weak, especially with a peso that couldn't adjust because it was pegged to the dollar, and therefore couldn't depreciate to make Argentine goods cheaper abroad. In effect, the peso became very overvalued, making imports cheaper and exports less competitive. That means the trade deficit continued worsening. By 1999, newly elected President Fernando de la Rúa found himself in political quicksand. Argentina's national debt surged past 100% of GDP, and investor confidence took a nosedive. Now, for some countries, a 100% debt to GDP ratio isn't that bad, but Argentina had a huge problem. Its debt was dollar-denominated, and it couldn't print more dollars. Worse, the overvalued peso made repayment harder, and investors demanded punishing returns to lend money. By 2001, bond interest rates skyrocketed to over 20%, driven by default fears and collapsing market trust. Desperate to avoid disaster, De la Rúa turned to the IMF, securing a bailout loan of around $40 billion. Meanwhile, the unemployment rate soared past 21%, exports kept falling, and inflation, though not hyperinflation, was nowhere near tamed either. It was a slow-motion train wreck. In late 2001, the country defaulted on $102 billion in sovereign debt, the largest sovereign default in history at the time. And yes, you know the drill. Massive bank runs, once again, as Argentines lost all trust in their currency, their banks, and their government. What followed was pure economic mayhem. Banks froze personal accounts, a policy known as the corralito. The rule is, everyone only has a limit of cash withdrawals of 250 pesos per week, which sparked massive protests and riots. Poverty exploded, with over 50% of Argentines living below the official poverty line. The GDP shrank by 28% between 1998 and 2002, and the country cycled through 5 presidents in just 2 weeks. During 2002 to 2017, Argentina's economy continued its wild rollercoaster ride. There were brief moments of relief, glimpses of recovery, only to be followed by yet another downturn. In 2002, President Eduardo Duhalde made a bold, long-term move by ending the convertibility plan, aka pegging US dollar. It was the right decision economically, but the short-term fallout was brutal. The peso immediately lost nearly 70% of its value, sparking a fresh round of inflation, bank runs, and violent street protests. Argentina was once again in survival mode. Throughout the presidencies of Nestor Kirchner and later his wife Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, national debt remained a chronic burden. Instead of addressing structural imbalances, the government leaned heavily on the central bank to finance deficits, printing money at alarming rates. As expected, inflation surged. eroding wages and savings. And thus, Argentina fell deeper into its now familiar vicious cycle. High debt, high interest rates, money printing or borrowing, peso devaluation, inflation, public unrest, political turnover, repeat. Successive administrations, the Kirchners, Mauricio Macri, and Alberto Fernandez, all stumbled through the same economic minefield, each unable to break free from the pattern. Entering Milei, the political equivalent of a Molotov cocktail. He's an economist, TV personality, and former tantric sex coach. Not kidding. So, what's his shock therapy? No half measures. Slash government, kill inflation, dismantle the central bank, and maybe, just maybe, dollarize the whole economy. So what has Milei actually done since taking office in December 2023? The cuts: 1. Eliminated 9 of 18 ministries. 2nd, froze public hiring. 3rd, slashed subsidies: fuel, transport, electricity. The economic data so far in 2025. 1. Inflation, March 2025, down to 55.9% from 211%. Yup, I know 55% inflation still sounds high, but remember 5,000% inflation in 1989. Argentina's inflation comes a long way, and let's see if the numbers will consistently go down. 2nd, peso devaluation, reached 1,125 Argentine pesos per US dollar since Milei elected, but it seems stabilized. 3. Budget deficit, on track for 0% primary deficit in 2025. 4. Foreign reserves, replenished to $40 billion. 5. GDP growth forecast, 2025, 5.5%, with investment trickling back. 6. Bond yields, down 250 basis points since January 2024. Unemployment has risen slightly to 5.8%, and real wages fell by over 10% last year. But inflation is falling, the market is responding, and foreign investors are watching closely. One big gamble still looms: dollarization. Milei wants to ditch the peso entirely, but that means giving up monetary policy, seizing enough reserves, and surviving public backlash. It's radical, but in Argentina, radical may be the only thing left to try. Argentina is a land of staggering beauty and potential, yet trapped in an economic purgatory for decades. Now, with Milei swinging the axe, we're witnessing the biggest fiscal transformation in a generation. The numbers say progress is being made, but so far it's been progress paid in pain. The big question is, can this pain be turned into prosperity? If Argentina's economy were a patient recently moved from the ICU and struggling to recover from a severe illness, Milei's treatment appears effective for now. However, there is still a long road ahead to full recovery. Milei once said, "You don't get out of poverty by magic. You get out of poverty with capitalism, savings, and hard work." Now, let's see whether Argentina can sustain its economic discipline and laborious efforts. Do you think Milei's radical economic reforms will actually work in the long run? Or is Argentina just setting itself up for another bust? If your country were facing triple-digit inflation, would you prefer shock therapy like Milei's, or a more gradual, cautious approach? Drop your answers in the comments. If you made it this far, congrats. You know Argentina's rollercoaster modern historic economy very well. Hit that like button if you learned something new. Subscribe for more deep dives into the wild world of global economics, and don't forget to ring that bell so you never miss an episode. Until next time, keep your lens sharp, your mind curious, and your pesos. Well, never mind. Maybe converted those to dollars already.